Welcome, everyone. My name is Sarah Rathbun. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications here at Dry Creek Vineyard, and it's so good to see all your faces. It feels like it's been so long since a month ago when we did our 1972 tasting, and it's been a while since we've had our winemaker, Tim. He's been a little bit busy, so it's really fun to have him back in the driver's seat again with a virtual tasting. Just a couple little ground rules again, like usual. I'm keeping everybody muted for the moment, just so that we, don't have any kind of vacuums going in the background or dogs barking or anything like that, because I know that we all really want to hear what Tim has to say today, because this is a topic that I have been really interested in having him present to you guys for a while now. So I'm excited it's coming to fruition. Please feel free to use that chat button that you see down at the bottom. I'm going to be collecting questions and making sure that I can get them answered kind of at the appropriate times, because I kind of know where Tim's going with this. So I'll make sure that we get to all of your questions that we possibly can. So without further ado, I am going to hand it over to our winemaker, Tim Bell, to get us started for the evening.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Welcome, everybody. It's great to see you. I am really excited about this as well. This has been the topic of barrels and how they influence wine, how we use them as a tool in shaping the wine is just something that I find endlessly fascinating. I love to talk about, and we've got a lot of ground to cover. So and I want to leave some room for questions too. So, and by the way, there's 3 wines that we'll be tasting along the way as well. So each one will concentrate on some specific barrels that were used in that wine and tell you why we use those as well. So I'm really looking forward to having a good evening with you. I always like to start off by saying what's going on at the winery at the moment. And as we speak, I can hear the last few minutes of bottling going on. We are actually bottling our 2020 Chenin Blanc, and it's tasting great. I'm really excited about that wine. And we are busy doing trial blends on other wines. We just finished up our blend of the rosé for 2020, the Estate Zinfandel rosé. So that will be getting actually put together shortly. And what else is on? Fumé Blanc is coming up, and Old Vine Zinfandel. So a lot of things going on. We're definitely in blending mode right now. So a lot of wine tasting going on. It's a tough gig, but we're up for it. And so today, as I said, we're gonna kind of focus on the topic of barrels, and I want to just talk briefly about why we use barrels for wine. And I was kind of interested in, I didn't actually have this fact in my head until I looked it up today, but wondering when did people first start using wood barrels for wine? And when I looked it up. Of course, at least on the internet, it tells me 350 BC, people were definitely using barrels to ship wine. And I just always wonder, who was the person that first figured out, okay, I'm going to cut these pieces of wood, I'm going to piece them together into this really weird shape, and it's going to not leak, and it's going to be great for holding wine. And who figured out all that geometry and how to work with the wood. It certainly didn't happen overnight. But the barrels have just become a really great tool for us in winemaking. So there's several benefits that I wanted to point out. The first one is that we get a nice slow uptake of oxygen into the barrel. And a lot of work has been done on that over the years. The best that I can sort of piecing together different information is it's mostly a little bit of air kind of actually going through the staves, the little tiny crack between the staves, allowing some air into the barrel. But you can, the barrels just are very sound, and as the wine evaporates slowly, it actually draws a vacuum. And so our bungs that are sitting in there get very, firmly entrenched in the barrel. It's very hard to pull them off. When you pull them off, you hear a sucking sound because you're relieving the vacuum. The pressure of the outside air is finally getting into the wine. But anyhow, that slow uptake of oxygen is really important for a good pace of maturation of the wine. So it takes wine from being kind of fresh and fruity and maybe somewhat simple and really transforms it into a more complex beverage with just some more mature qualities that we really enjoy. The other thing is obviously there's some flavor uptake from newer barrels, at least. Older barrels we don't get so much, if any, wood flavor. But it turns out that white oak, which is typically what we use for barrels, although not exclusively, but white oak we've really come to value the flavors that we can get from that as well. Now, I mentioned also as you're aging in barrels that you're actually having some evaporation. So, over time, if you pull off that bung and peek inside the barrel, let's say you filled it right to the tippy top when it was first full, and a month later, there's a little gap between that bung hole and the surface of the wine. And so, some people call it things like the angel's share or whatever, but we do have some evaporation through the wood of the wine. And I like to think of this as another important process in making the wine. It's for me, it's like making a reduction sauce. So we're slowly concentrating down all the good stuff in that liquid to a smaller volume, right? And we do come periodically, like once a month, and top the barrel. So we add a little more wine, fill it back up, but still we're getting that kind of slow reducing of the wine. So making it a little more concentrated. I just think of it as like a really slow boil, making a really great reduction sauce. And then the last thing I'd mention is the tannins in the wood also contribute to the wine. So add some texture, some body, contributes to how it feels in your mouth, maybe making it a little richer, and also giving it some antioxidants that kind of help the wine age. But also some of those tannins, especially with reds, with red wines, they can combine with the pigments and help stabilize the color in the wine as well, so that not as much of those pigments drop out over time. So there's just a lot of great benefits that we get from wood aging. We're going to talk just a little bit about the barrel making process, and I'm going to have Sarah show us some photographs along the way. And why don't we start, Sarah, with the photograph of an oak forest? And
I will. Tim, we actually already have our first question that I want to jump in on just really quick. So I was looking for a picture of it. Is what is a bung? And so I actually have a picture of one that I'm very frantically trying to get put in here really quick.
I can
put up on the screen.
Pull one out.
That's true. You could. I don't want to mess up any of the wine. So if you give me just a quick second, I will get a picture of the bung up, because I think it is really something that until you see it, it just sounds kind of strange. So pull this up for you.
It's basically a big stopper.
There you go. That's what a bung is.
So you can see in the background of the photograph the hole where we fill the barrel and we empty the barrel. It's pretty small. It's about I think like 50 millimeters in diameter, which, what is that? It might be like a couple of inches. And the bungs these days are made out of silicone. In the past, they used to use wood bungs, and they'd be really long, and you'd take a big hammer and pound them in. And when I first started making wine, almost 30 years ago, not quite, one of the wineries I worked at was still using some of those wood bungs. It was pretty unusual, but it was kind of very old school and very cool to work with those. So that's what a bung is.
So now we will go on to our regularly scheduled tasting here.
Good work, Sarah. That was quick.
Aim to please.
So this is an oak forest in France, and I was lucky enough back in 2010 to visit a forest very similar to this. And the thing you'll notice here is just how straight those trees are. Now the oak typically used for white wine barrels is white oak. It's a specific subset of oak, so it's not like kind of a lot of the really spindly and crooked oaks that grow around where I live here in California. These are very tall, straight-growing oaks, and that turns out to be really great for making barrel staves. And so they'll harvest these trees, and all these forests in France are sustainably farmed, so they're replanting and maintaining the forests there. And so what we've seen here in this photograph is actually they've sawed the tree into logs, taken off the bark, obviously, and they're splitting the wood. So this is a really important process for European oak. You split it, you don't saw it. And that has to do with the way the grain or the conductive tissue of the wood basically works. So you want to split with the grain so that the barrel doesn't leak when you end up making the barrel. If you were to saw European oak, you'd end up with a leaky barrel. And I had a really good example of this. So back in the mid 90s, so there's a long history of making barrels in France, obviously, but also in other parts of Europe, and like Hungary, Czechoslovakia, some areas of Russia, like in the Caucasus Mountains, I think, or that general area. So during the Cold War, the Eastern European countries that used to make barrels, they kind of got out of that. And then as things loosened up, they started making barrels again. But those winery I was working at, we bought some Czechoslovakian barrels, and almost like 90% of them leaked. I mean, I think they were sawing the wood or something. They didn't know how to do this splitting process. The last thing I'll say about this step is American barrels or United States barrels is a different species of white oak. So you can saw that wood. So it's actually a little bit easier process that you can just saw it in 4 pieces. And eventually you cut this wood into smaller slats or staves that make up the barrel. And so the next photograph we'll look at is those staves aging out in the open air. And you can see here, it's just amazing how vast this yard of wood is. This is all oak staves aging, and they're all kind of crisscross stacked on these pallets out in the air, and they're exposed to the sun and the wind and the rain. And they'll sit there for, usually at least 2 years, sometimes 3, maybe even 4. But typically 2 to 3 is the range that you'll see. And it's really important to have that time so you leach out some of the harshness of the wood, the tannins, and eventually, through that process, it makes it much more palatable. If you were to use this wood, very early on, you'd have this really strong sort of green wood flavor in the barrel, even after toasting, and it wouldn't be as good. So very important step in the process. Okay, so then the next step is kind of putting these staves together in the cooperage and forming the barrel. And you see here a cooper working with just the start of these barrels. And they've got, the staves are still straight, they're not bent. And they're putting these iron hoops on the barrels to kind of hold them in place. And then they will use either fire or water, very hot water, to bend the wood, or sometimes both. Sometimes there's combination processes. And even when they're using fire to heat and bend the wood, they'll be spraying down periodically the inside of the barrel so it doesn't catch on fire. They don't really want to do any toasting, appreciable toasting yet at this point in the process. So the next step then we'll talk about is toasting, and we'll show a photograph of that as well. And so what you can't see here is inside that barrel, there's a little metal pot with holes in it, and there's little chunks of wood. So all the scraps that they don't get to use for the barrel, they actually go to be part of the toasting process. So the pot's maybe like this big, and they put the wood in there. They set those chunks on fire. They put the barrel. They might turn it around. A lot of the cooperages even have these turntables that automatically turn the barrel around. And this is the part of the process that really is important for flavoring the barrel. I mean, the whole thing is, the wood selection, the right forest, but this can really fine tune and shape the flavors of the barrel. It's really amazing. Cooperages today, so the old joke, about French cooperages is like, light toast is 1 cigarette, medium toast is 2, and heavy toast is 3 cigarettes, and that's when it's done. They actually do flip the barrel over too, so you get more even toasting. But they've gotten much more scientific. So when I started out in the business, you'd talk about a light toast, a medium toast, sometimes medium plus, and then there'd be heavy toast. There weren't a whole lot of options. But now a lot of the coopers have gotten away from just using those very simple basic terms, and they use different names or numbers for different toasting profiles. Because depending on how long and how hot the barrel's on the fire and how hot the fire is, and what temperature the barrel itself gets to when in the toasting process really affects the flavor. And you want to get some nice slow penetration into the wood to kind of caramelize the natural sugars in the wood. So nowadays they'll monitor the temperature of the inside surface of the barrel with infrared thermometers. So it's kind of the same thing, like we've all gotten familiar now in COVID of getting our temperature checked at different places, and you have that little gun thing that people point at your forehead. Same thing. It's an infrared sensor that they doesn't actually get in the barrel, but it just senses the temperature from a remote distance. And so by controlling the temperature of the fire and the time on the fire, we can really get different flavors. And so one of our cooperages was nice enough to share these toasting graphs with us. So this is one profile that they actually call it Profile 1, and you'll see that it's not a very long toasting time, but it kind of ramps up to a certain temperature, plateaus for a short bit, and then they take the temperature up again, and then bring it down a little bit and flatten it off, and then they take the barrel off the fire. This profile is actually the profile that we use on our fusion barrel, which we will talk about later when we're talking about one of the wines that uses the fusion barrel. But just to show you a contrast, Sarah will put up another graph. So this is the same Cooper calls this Profile 8. And you see it's a very different time temperature curve. So again, about the same amount of time, but it ramps up in intensity of heat very quickly to a peak, and then comes down very rapidly, and then just levels off. So you can see that it's really more complex than just build a fire and spend a certain amount of minutes with the barrel on the fire. In the end, what you can do is you can get barrels that are more spicy, or have more sort of mocha chocolate flavors, maybe more vanilla. Also, that toasting can break down tannins in the barrel, so the barrel can be less harsh, or more add more structure to the wine. So that it's really an important tool in us shaping the flavors of wines. And so that's kind of the quick overview of making barrels.
Hey, Tim, we had a really interesting question about the toasting from Lisa, saying, do they ever toast a barrel with a different species of wood than the barrel is made from?
It's a good question. I have not heard of that happening. What I've always heard is that they're using the same species of wood to toast it, but I would venture to say that could be a very interesting area of research, and I would imagine somebody's maybe has tried that. I will tell you, though, that other than using wood for the toasting process, there are some people that have played with other ways of doing the toasting. Like there's one cooperage I know of that has a ceramic heating element that they insert into the barrel. There's others that they call it convection toasting, and I don't really understand it fully, but there have been people that use different sources for the toasting. So we could jump into talking about the wines, unless there's some more barrel questions that we should talk about.
I think there's some thirsty people, so I think we should start with the wines, and then I will pepper their questions in as appropriate. How about that? Does everybody think that's okay?
I see a lot of people giving a thumbs up or nodding.
Exactly.
I see you, Joanne. So, all right, let's talk about wine. Why not? That's my favorite subject. Barrels are my second favorite topic. So our first wine tonight that we're going to talk about is the 2019 Marinus. This is a white Meritage wine. So we've only made this for about 3 vintages now. 2017 was our first vintage. This is the 2019. It's been a really fun project for me and Brian, our assistant winemaker, the whole winemaking team. So for many years, we've made the Mariner, which is a Meritage red, and you see it here in the photograph with the Marinus. And Dry Creek was the first winery to use the term Meritage. We were part of the people that group back in, the 80s maybe, that formed this term. And Meritage is just a term that refers to a style of wine that uses the native grapes, or the grapes native to the Bordeaux region of France. And is kind of following that Bordeaux model, but it's here in the United States. And actually it's grown to be an international term, so it's used in other countries as well. And the rules are that you have to use more than one grape variety. You can't use more than 90% of any one grape variety. And the goal initially was you're making the finest blend of this type for any given vintage. So for us, like we said, we've been doing this with red wines for many years, but we finally entered into making a white meritage just a few years ago. And I really felt like we were ready because I had done a lot of experimentation with Sauvignon Blanc in barrels. And this is a wine that relies more on barrels than any of our other Sauvignon Blanc blends. So in Bordeaux, France, when they make white wines, they're typically barrel fermented, barrel aged. There might be some variations, but it's very much focused on barrels. And so we've taken more of that approach here, but we definitely have that wonderful California fruit as part of the wine as well. So with this particular wine, I'll talk about what the right varieties are. So there's 3 white varieties that you're allowed to use for a white meritage, and one is Sauvignon Blanc, which if you're a Dry Creek fan, you're very familiar with that because that's one of the biggest things we do. The other varieties are Semillon. It's a little less well-known white variety, but is definitely used in Bordeaux, and some people do bottle it on its own. Not as common, but it does get bottled on its own. And Sauvignon Blanc is very aromatic, as you know, has beautiful citrus and when riper, tropical fruit flavors. Also a little bit of touch of some maybe dried herbs sometimes, like thyme or rosemary, or maybe even bell pepper sometimes if it's a young, more green style. And then Semillon is a pretty subtle grape. It adds mostly like texture and body. It's a little richer mouthfeel than Sauvignon Blanc. Sauvignon Blanc is kind of on the lighter side. The last grape that we can talk about is Muscadel. And for in the Meritage Alliance that's here founded in the United States, they call it Muscadel de Bordelais. It means Muscadel from Bordeaux, France. And this is a pretty obscure white. It's not used a lot, but there is used in small amounts as a blender in Bordeaux. And I don't know of anyone growing it in Sonoma County, but a few years ago, when we were contemplating this wine, we have a grower that we love, Kevin Skeen, who had 1 acre of ground and said, "You want something, that I could plant for you?" And I thought of the Muscadel immediately because I've never worked with it. I'd love to work with it and try it for this blend. And so it has worked out really nicely. And in the end, this particular blend, the 2019, is 90% Sauvignon Blanc. It's 6% of the Muscadel and 4% Semillon. And that Muscadel is a little bit more subtle also aromatically than Sauvignon Blanc, but I think it has a little more going for it than Semillon actually. You do get some nice floral and melon flavors, maybe some like really nice ripe cantaloupe or even honeydew melon as a part of that, and some nice sort of floral aromas along with it. So I really love it as a blender for this wine. I've been talking about it. I'm going to taste the wine, and if you haven't, join me. So I get some, for me, this wine has some nice richness that comes from a little bit of barrel fermentation and barrel aging. It's round, but it's got good crisp acidity, and that's really something I wanted, because the best white Bordeauxs that I've tasted are really highlighted by good acid. So even though they've got maybe a little oak, a little barrel thyme, and a little bit of yeastiness even maybe from fermenting in the barrel, they have that nice, bright acid that really carries the wine and helps it age as well. And this has some really nice sort of, tropical flavors, some floral qualities as well. So let's talk about the barrel, the fermentation and the barrel regime on this a little bit. So this wine was fermented 63% in barrels, and the rest of it was fermented in stainless steel tanks. So that kind of is going in 2 very different directions. In barrels, we don't really have a lot of control over temperature, so it does get warmer, although we do ferment in a refrigerated warehouse. So our temperatures, in barrel, the fermentation gets up maybe 65, 68 degrees. In stainless steel, we keep it cool. It's in the low to mid 50s for most of the fermentation. At the end, we might let it get a little warmer. And it takes longer because of that lower temperature. So maybe 20, 25 days at the cool temperature in a stainless steel tank, whereas the barrels probably finished in 7 to 10 days. It's pretty quick. You also get some benefit of in the barrel of some contact with the yeast. And then there's the barrel itself, and that's where I think things get interesting for this wine in particular. So we do use some new oak. It was about 20, I think this was 22% new oak. And that process of finding the right kind of barrels for Sauvignon Blanc took us a number of years. I had to do a lot of trials because for me, most new oak barrels add too much toast and just really get in the way of the beautiful aromatics of Sauvignon Blanc. But we have found some barrels that are very nice. They add a nice subtle spice and a little bit of toastiness, but it's pretty subtle. And when you taste this wine, you don't taste obvious wood, and I didn't want that. But the other important component of this is some barrels made from other woods, not oak. So we use acacia wood. It's made from acacia trees. Well, it's actually called black locust, but we'll get into that in a second. And then a little bit of chestnut wood barrels as well. And so, Sarah, maybe you can show us some of the trees, like the acacia tree. So this is acacia, and these barrels we get are made in France. But this tree is actually really called, although they refer to it as acacia, it's really false acacia, or it's actually called black locust. And it's actually native to the United States. So these trees were transplanted to France, and the French started making barrels out of it. What I like about acacia is it's a very low impact on the wine. So it doesn't have as much toastiness or woodiness as white oak does. And so it really lets the aromatics of the wine come through, but you get some of that benefit of the oxygen uptake in the barrel aging, some of that concentration that I talked about, and actually a little bit of flavor contribution. We do a light toast on these acacia barrels, but we also, if it spends a few months, maybe like 4 or 5 months in the barrel, you get this sort of subtle but interesting floral and maybe even slightly green quality to it. So I almost think of it as like, fresh cut flowers, and you can smell the stem that you just cut along with the beautiful floral quality of that. That's kind of what you get from the acacia barrels. And it's a really nice, different, subtle influence on the wine. And here's what one of those barrels looks like as well. You can't really tell unless you have the barrels side by side, but the color of the wood is different. So if you're used to what oak looks like, these acacia barrels and then the chestnut barrels really stand out. And then I think we have a photograph of a chestnut tree as well. Yeah. So these also are made in France. They've been used in Europe for red wines, but not extensively. And I don't know of anyone around here using chestnut barrels at all, let alone for white wine. And this, again, was just a trial and error kind of thing. I was trying all different kinds of wood for Sauvignon Blanc in that quest to find the right combination. So chestnut barrels do impart a pretty pronounced flavor. It's a light toast, but it gives it sort of a vanilla cream flavor. It's almost like cream soda if you have that kind of beverage. But so it's a little extreme, but I like just a small amount. So in this blend, I think we've used like 3% chestnut barrels. And it just adds a subtle creaminess and texture that I really like. And so that's also been an important tool for us in making this Marinus. And this wine was aged in barrel for 7 months. So not quite as long as our Chardonnay might be, but definitely more barrel time than the barrel component that you might see in our Sauvignon Blanc blend, for example, our Dry Creek Sauvignon Blanc, which also uses the acacia and chestnut, but at a much lower level. So anyhow, it's just for me, it's come together really nicely, and we love all those unique combinations, and I think we're very unique in the combination of wood types that we use here for this wine.
Well, speaking of that, Lisa was asking, does the success of the acacia or black locust and chestnut encourage you to think about other species for barrels?
Yeah, it actually has. We've a few years ago, and we still have some of these trials going. We got just a few barrels of cherry wood Had no idea, but what that would be like. But it's used sometimes for aging spirits, like brandies, and I think in particular maybe fruit brandies. We tried some cherry wood, and we first tried it with some Cabernet. I got to say, I didn't really like it. it had a really pronounced cherry flavor, but not in such a good way. It was almost a little musky too. We do have some Petite Syrah aging in some cherry wood. I need to revisit that. I have to get back to you on how that's going, but I kind of thought it might work with something really big and bold like Petite Syrah. So we'll still experimenting, but you're kind of somewhat limited in what woods you can use for barrels because it's the property of the wood itself. That's one of the reasons like oak has become so popular, is because it's actually the vascular tissue or the conductive tissue of the trees forms these little natural blockages, and that's what prevents it from leaking. Because if they didn't do that, the wine would soak into the stave and then just kind of make its way out the end of the barrel. So it's really a unique property of white oak that lends it to being a liquid container.
So Lee and Eugenia were wondering kind of about the toasting process. Is it trial and error to figure out what you like to get the profile you're aiming for, or kind of how do you decide on that level of toasting?
Yeah, it is to some extent trial and error. The people we work with, the Coopers, do have previous experience with other people and their own research and development. So I can kind of, often tell them I'm looking for this or that. And they might say, well, you might like this particular wood selection and this toast regime. And we'll maybe try 2 or 4 barrels. And if we like it, we'll expand the use of those barrels. It doesn't always work, but often they can kind of help guide and shape us in the direction that we want to go. We do use a lot of the same Coopers year after year because we've learned which ones we really like for particular wines. But there's always some experimentation and trials going on because we're always looking to see what we can do better and see if you find some interesting new flavor profile that you haven't achieved before.
So Victor had an interesting question of how do you clean the barrels before you use them?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's very important. It's not like a stainless steel tank, which has this really nice smooth surface that's easy to clean and get gunk off of it. And we are concerned about spoilage. We don't want any yeast or bacteria building up a population in the nooks and crannies of the wood that would lead to spoiling the wine, like making it taste too vinegary or give it other weird flavors. So cleaning is very important. So basically it starts with, once we've emptied the barrel, we have a rotating nozzle that gets put into the barrel. So the barrel's turned over upside down to allow any last bits of wine and lees, which is kind of the sediment you get at the bottom of the barrel, that gets to drain out. And then we put this nozzle inside, and it's hooked up to a pressure washer. So it's a pressurized nozzle that rotates, and it's a very intense pressure that can kind of, stuff sticks to the outside of the barrel if the wine's been in there for a year or more. And so you'll get some crystals of tartaric acid forming on the barrel. It's kind of crusty sometimes, so it really helps blast it off. And we're using hot water, which helps really clean and break down that gunk on the barrel. And then we'll use a cool water rinse. If the barrel is pretty clean, hasn't had any microbial problems, that might be the end of it. We let it dry, and then we put a little shot of sulfur dioxide gas in it, just a touch, that really helps prevent growth of unwanted microorganisms. And then before we use the barrel the next time, that gas is pretty much dissipated, but we also rinse it out to make sure that we've dissipated that. But if we think we need to do some further cleaning, we have some other tools. So we have a steam generator is kind of the most popular one. And you actually put this big metal wand with holes in it, and it's an electric steam generator. We just plug it in, we add some water to the tank and let it go. And it might go like 5 minutes, and it really steams the barrel, gets it nice and warm. And then you pull the wand out, and sometimes you put a bung in there for a few minutes. And so as that steam in there cools and kind of condenses into water, it forms a vacuum. but it also, that vacuum kind of helps draw out all the wine that's soaked into the staves and microorganisms as well that have sort of made their way in there. And then you dump that water out and you rinse it with some cold water and let it dry and put the barrel away. So those are kind of some of the tools we have. We also can use some ozone, which is something like is used in, like when you get bottled water. They purify the water with ozone. It's basically just oxygen that has an extra electron, I think, on it, and it breaks down very quickly. But it's a really great sort of it's actually you can smell ozone sometimes when there's lightning storm and a bolt of lightning is hit nearby perhaps, and it charges the air. So it's just kind of a naturally occurring phenomenon.
Okay, well, I know that we have people starting in on their reds that I can see, but I do have a couple quick questions on Marinus that maybe we can just kind of address really quick before we transition to the next one. We had a question from Michelle wanting to know how long we had to kind of grow the Muscadel grapes before they were able to be harvested.
Yeah, so Muscadel turns out is a very vigorous grape. So I think we got a tiny crop the second year after planting, but really it was in that third year that when we first started getting the fruit, and it's really been a labor of love for our grower too. He had some, so he planted all this rootstock, and then he bought the budwood of Muscadel, and he had to have people come and make the little cuts on the rootstock and put the buds in there and grow it, and not all of it took. So he had some vines that didn't work out, and so he had to replant those. And he's really had to learn how to work with all the vigor that the vine has to kind of give it enough to train it correctly so it doesn't get too bushy. And the whole process of thinning the fruit and everything. So he's really kind of getting it dialed in the last couple of years, and it's working out really nicely.
Great. And Peggy wanted to know if you think you'll keep this same blend for a future Marinus.
Well, this blend is always going to be predominantly Sauvignon Blanc. That's two factors. The Sauvignon Blanc is just so good, but we only have a tiny bit of Muscadel and Semillon to work with. But it will not ever be exactly the same. Typically, it's going to be a little bit different every year. So I could see some year we might have a blend that's 85% Sauvignon Blanc and made up with the other 15% is split between Semillon and Muscadel. 1 year we'll never go over 90, but 1 year it might be 88% Sauvignon Blanc. So it's always going to be a little different, and that's kind of, as a winemaker, one of the really fun things about making a meritage is you're not locked into a formula.
Perfect. Well, then let's move on to the Zinfandel. There's some other questions that I think will still apply to the next couple wines, so I'll ask you those as we keep going.
Sounds good.
We have a very inquisitive group today.
I like it. All right, so our next wine is 2017 Spencer's Hill Zinfandel. And I guess I'm going to just start off with saying, who is Spencer anyway? Well, I have an answer for you. This is Spencer with the beloved dog Holly, who, by the way, is a cover girl on the Wine Spectator magazine this month with Kim, our owner. But Spencer is the son of Kim and Don, our owners and leaders of the winery, and this wine was named after him. And the wine comes from our estate vineyard that's at the southeast edge of Dry Creek Valley, in what we often call the Lytton Springs area of the valley. It's a little bit warmer and a little just a different soil profile from other areas of the valley. And this is a photograph of the vineyard here. So you can see it's got some nice rolling hills, and you see that hill kind of off there in the distance. That's the hill. That's kind of this long hill that eventually slopes down to lower elevation. And we really love the Zinfandel that grows there. This Zinfandel that we grow there, so if you're familiar with our heritage vine Zinfandel, you've heard us talk about this unique selection of Zinfandel that we grow for our heritage vines, and we've got it planted in 4 different vineyards. This vineyard is one of those. So this is a single vineyard expression of that clone, and it's very What's fascinating to me is we've got this exact same selection of Zinfandel planted in 4 different vineyards, and all 4 vineyards make different tasting wines. So it really shows you the influence of site. And we also grow at Spencer's Hill, besides the Zinfandel, we grow some Petite Syrah. So Petite Syrah is the classic blender for Zinfandel. Zinfandel is a little bit lighter in color, but has this bright fruit, lots of sort of boysenberry, and people often say it's like a briar patch, and kind of a berry patch. You get some boysenberry and black cherry and sometimes cranberry and lots of spice. It's very characteristic of Dry Creek Valley to get things like cumin and coriander, maybe white pepper, black pepper, and then Zinfandel has these darker color. It's much darker and richer, has more tannin. It adds some color and structure and just gives more guts to the blend, I like to say. And this 2017, if you haven't tasted it, please do. It's just big and rich and voluptuous. I really love this wine. And it's very characteristic of the 2017 vintage. It was one of those rare years in recent times when we had a really good rainfall in the winter, which really was great, recharged the soil. And then we had kind of this cool weather in July and August, but then at the end of August and into the beginning of September, we had about a 5-day heat wave, which really, cranked up the harvest and made it go quickly. And it led to some concentration in the fruit. And I think it really shows in these wines like this one. It's beautiful, round, full, and rich. So yeah, I guess we should talk about barrels, right? In relationship to this wine, sort of getting lost in the wine itself, which is not a bad thing. So one of the things I like to talk about when we talk about our Zinfandels is a particular barrel that we created with the help of one of our cooperages that we work with. And we call this barrel a fusion barrel. And this is a shot of the fusion barrel. So this was another great example of how advances in barrel making have come to play, and all the science and technology that's involved. So if you can see, I don't know if you can see this well enough. I have a nice big screen in front of me so I can read it. It mentions that the barrel is 75% European oak and 25% American oak. But that's actually referring only to the staves, the sides of the barrel. But the end of the barrel, that round end, which is called the head, is actually French oak. And if you look at the very bottom, it says FO, so that's French oak, and TH, toasted heads. So that means not only were the staves toasted, but the heads or the end of the barrel were toasted as well. It says FG for fine grain, it's fine grain wood, and P1 is profile 1, which we showed you that temperature curve, toasting curve earlier. So how did we come up with this crazy combination of wood sources? It's all oak, but all different oak sources and toasting profile. And what we did is this Cooper actually has some software where you can kind of put in different attributes, which you can see here, things like toastiness and tannin, and emphasizing or de-emphasizing the fruit. I wanted a barrel for Zinfandel that respected the fruit. Zinfandel just has such wonderful fruit, and we don't usually use a lot of new oak. This particular blend was 32% new oak, which is really typically the high end. And we only went that high because it's so big and rich. If it was a little bit lighter and more delicate, we'd probably be more around 25 to 26% new oak. I wanted to have something that would really help accentuate the fruit, but also what I like from a good oak barrel is that it kind of takes the fruit and just it gives it more richness and depth. And so we played around on the computer with these different attributes, settled on we'd try a barrel like this, and this is what it came up with. So it specified the sources of the staves and what percentages, and the toasting profile. And you'll see, like we talked about, 75% European oak and 25% American oak. But then if you look at the oak percentages, it really kind of works out that it's only really like 56%, European oak, and it's 19 American and 25% French. So you've got this incredible combination. You also notice, besides the toasting profile I talked about, the bending is water bending. And so that typically makes a barrel that's less harsh, less tannins in it, so it's not as astringent. doesn't impart as much astringency to the wine. And this graph at the top is kind of a representation of relative intensities of these different flavor qualities. So you can see it's kind of got this nice combination of light toast and dark toast, but also a nice hit of spice and fruit. But it's lower on tannin and sort of moderate in vanilla. So it's proved to be a really good barrel for aging Zinfandel. We don't use that exclusively. We still use other barrels. I like having a lot of different ingredients in the pantry, but it really has been a success story for us and something unique that we developed here specifically for our Zinfandel.
So Lisa just caught something saying, does French oak come only from France, whereas European oak can come from anywhere else in Europe? So where does that European oak come from?
Yeah, so European oak, definitely, obviously France is part of Europe, so it could fall in that category. But when people in the business say European oak, typically they don't mean France, because you know how the French are. They've tried to convince us all that their oak is better than anybody else's, and then they charge more for it. And they're true. It's true. It's very good oak, but there's really good oak from Europe and in other countries, and it's the same species of oak. So there you go. But places like Hungary is a big source. We use a lot of Hungarian oak barrels. Other Eastern European countries, I don't know what they call Czechoslovakia anymore, if it's still called Czechoslovakia, but that's been a source. There's Slovenia. We just tried in 2019 for the 2019 vintage of Zinfandel some Slovenian oak, which I really liked. It was just a trial, and I want to try to use a few more of those. And then there's like the Caucasus Mountain region in general. You can get oak that is specifically Russian as well. So there's also Carpathian. I'm not even quite sure where Carpathia is, but we've used some Carpathian oak as well. That's a European oak source. So all over.
Perfect. Well, so we have gotten a couple aging questions, and then we probably should move to the Mariner. So one would be asking, how long would you recommend aging the Marinus, and then how long will the Zinfandel age?
Yeah, good question. So the Marinus, I think I would be comfortable with that for another maybe 4 years, maybe even 5. It kind of becomes a question of what you really like. It's definitely going to lose some freshness of fruit over time, but some other sort of aromas will develop. People call them sort of tertiary aromas, or it's kind of a fancy term, but basically you'll get some other qualities that will come out, and it just kind of depends if you like that. And the acid might diminish just a little bit, so it might get a little softer, and even maybe get a slight nuttiness as well. With the Zinfandel, it tastes really great right now, but seems pretty fresh. So I would say, easily 5, 8 years, maybe even 10. But I think I probably wouldn't go probably much past, another 5 to 7 years, because I still like some of that youthful fruit. Especially with Zinfandel, I just love having a little bit of that left there, along with some of the softness and roundness that you gather with aging.
Perfect. Well, then let's move on to the Mariner. Finish up with our French oak here.
Yeah. So the Mariner, we talked about it briefly in the context of the Marinus, but this is a wine that has been around for a while longer than the Marinus. And for us, it really represents our finest Bordeaux blend of any given vintage, our red Bordeaux. So the grape varieties that are allowed to be used in a red meritage are the 5 red Bordeaux grape varieties. So it's Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, there's Merlot, Malbec, and Petit Verdot. And they all have different distinct personalities that lend something interesting to the blend. In this blend, we typically do take the lead. Cabernet Sauvignon takes the lead, and then we use varying amounts of the others. Merlot is typically the next highest amount, but it's a different percentage of these varieties every year. And I always talk about the benefits of having different grape varieties to blend with. So in 2013, that was a year that produced very big, rich wines, and the tannins on the wines were high. It was a little rough, and so when we were playing around with the Mariner trial blends, We loved a lot of the flavors and aromas we were getting, but the tannins were a little rough. But it wasn't until we started using more Malbec, because the Malbec has some softer tannins and also a really nice, round, rich mouthfeel. It kind of just brought the whole blend together and put the tannins in balance. And the benefit of that is that we didn't have to do any fining or other fiddling around with the wine, things like egg whites or gelatin that you might add to the wine to pull out some of the tannins. We could just use the natural ingredients we had laid out. And that's always, for me, the first choice. Want to do as little manipulating of the wine as possible. I don't think fining is a bad thing. Using egg whites to fine red wines is a long honored tradition in Bordeaux. But if you don't have to do it, why do it? So that's kind of the story there. And so that's kind of the overall benefit of blending. In terms of so let's talk about this blend. This is 69% Cabernet Sauvignon. It's 15% Merlot, 6% Cabernet Franc, and then 5% each of Malbec and Petit Verdot. And I always like to talk about kind of two vineyards in relationship to this wine. So one, because there are two very key vineyards for this wine. One is the Endeavor Vineyard. This is our estate vineyard. It's actually the same location as Spencer's Hill, but it's a different area of the vineyard where we've got Cabernet Sauvignon and Petit Verdot growing. The Cabernet Sauvignon is always one of our best. It's concentrated, it's rich, it's beautiful, and the Petit Verdot is just amazing as well. Petit Verdot in particular has, and this is a great shot of the hill of Cab. This was kind of my view when I first started here in 2011 and went with Don Wallace to view this vineyard, and I just looked at this green canopy of vines across the hill and said, this looks really good. And it's a really great vineyard. The Petit Verdot is kind of off more to the side of the photograph, and it's really dark. It has a beautiful dark color, pure berry fruit, and some really nice tannins for contributing to the wine. The other vineyard that's really key to this is our DCV6 vineyard, which is right across the road from the winery. And this is kind of a nice aerial view looking down into the vineyard. We grow there Cabernet Franc and Malbec. And the Cabernet Franc, I always tell people, is the best Cabernet Franc I've ever worked with in my career. Quite honestly, I know as a Bordeaux style winemaker, I'm supposed to like Cabernet Franc, and I hadn't really liked it much because it seemed to always be pretty light in body and color and not really great intensity of fruit. And after a little age, it would get sort of weedy or even take on sort of like a dried chili quality that just wasn't what I was looking for in wines. But this Cabernet Franc that we have in DCV6 has great intensity of color. It's a clone or a selection from the Loire Valley in France, which is known for its intensity of color. So it's definitely a lighter bodied wine than Cabernet Sauvignon, which is pretty big and rich, but it has nice intensity and it really ages well. So for me, it's just wonderful. The Malbec that grows from this vineyard is also some of the best Malbec I've ever worked with. Dark, rich color, beautiful, berry fruit. For me, it's sort of like that acai berry beverage that you might have tried. And as I said, very supple and round. So it adds some really great texture to the blend. And then kind of the fifth variety, the Merlot, we typically source from a vineyard that we've been buying from for probably 30, 40 years. It's the Long family that we have this great long relationship with, and a great source of Merlot for this blend. So I guess let's talk barrels in relationship to this wine. But first, let's give it a taste.
Well, we did have a quick question, which I don't know, all these things, that's how easy it is to have a quick answer. Saying, is there anything in particular to the soil or the site where the Malbec is grown that you think contributes to the quality? I guess that would kind of go across the board for most of our varietals.
Yeah, well, in general, yes, the soil is really important, and the really general quality that we're looking for in any soils for red grapes in particular is that it's well drained. It's not highly fertile soil, so we don't want the vines to have too much horsepower and just put a lot of leaves out and shoots, and we want it to be very balanced. So it kind of throttles back and restricts the growth a little bit. And the way you get that well drained soil is typically you have some rocks and mixed in there, so it's fairly rocky soil. So it's just got to be the kind of the right combination of soil texture. Aside from that, it's the exposure, like how much sun does it get through the day? Is it, if it's on a slope, is it south facing or north facing? South exposure gets more sun, north not as much. All those factors come into shaping the flavors of the fruit. And at DCV6, it is that vineyard actually starts on a hill and then kind of slopes down to a lower elevation. And we also grow Sauvignon Blanc there. So that lower elevation soil is more fertile. And basically what kind of happens over time is some of that soil kind of rolls, erodes down the hill, and you get a lot of soil, loose soil collected and rich soil collected at the low elevation, and a little bit sparser soil at the top. And so that Sauvignon Blanc is down in that more fertile ground, which is perfect for Sauvignon Blanc. And then up on the rockier hillsides where it's well drained and less vigorous soil, we've got the reds, both the Cabernet Franc and the Malbec. Did I answer that more thoroughly than I should? I don't know.
We can talk about barrels and
yeah.
trees.
Yeah, barrels with this. So first of all, the Mariner is a big, rich red. So we do use a little more new oak than we might use for other Bordeaux reds. Like I'll give you our Cabernet Sauvignon that we make, just our Dry Creek Cabernet Sauvignon, typically is 30 to maybe 32, 34% new oak. The Mariner is somewhere usually around 40 to 50%, maybe even a little higher in some years, but usually in that 40 to 50% range. And this year it was a 42% new oak. What's really key for the oak component of this wine is a lot of the French oak. We do use some Hungarian oak as well, but I typically always select some of my favorite French coopers that make barrels that really work well with Cabernet and Malbec and Petit Verdot and Merlot, all these varieties that we use in the Mariner. And it just, for some reason, some of these French coopers just really have this wonderful wood and toasting that can take the flavors of the wine, make this, maybe it's like starts out with sort of boysenberry kind of fruit and makes it more like black raspberry, something a little deeper and richer. Maybe adds a little subtle note of chocolate or mocha, and maybe even a little hint of vanilla, and also adds some nice texture and tannin to the wine as well. So for me, that's really the key with a fine barrel for this wine and French oak. That's what it contributes to this wine.
Oh, there we go. Get off of mute here. So we had a great question before about aging in barrels and blending in barrels. Are you keeping all of the varietals separate in separate barrels and then just putting them into another barrel to blend, or kind of walk us through that process?
Yeah, so in general, yes, we are aging all the different lots of wine separately in barrels and blending at the end. However, we will, in a very limited way, sometimes do fermentation of more than one variety together. So, for the Mariner, for example, we typically always have at least one or two lots of Cabernet Sauvignon where we've actually crushed a little bit of Petit Verdot fruit in the tank with it and fermented it together. And I like doing that when we can, because I really like that combination that we get. We really build in some nice richness and structure up front for a nice big wine that ages well in the barrel. But I'm going to show you something here. So this is the blend sheet for the 2017 Mariner that you're tasting right now. And you see there's a lot of lines on there. There's a lot of different lots of wine. And so, it's divided out by barrel type. So for example, at the top, I've got some Petit Verdot. There's two barrels that were in a brand new French oak barrel from Loire, one of my favorite French coopers for Bordeaux reds. And then there's two more barrels that were in some older barrels. So those older barrels don't contribute a lot of flavor, but they do give you some of the benefit of barrel aging. But basically, what I'm showing you that and telling you about this is because there's a lot of individual pieces, all these different ingredients we have. So, different vineyards, different varieties, and then some vineyards we do more than one pick. So like in the Endeavor vineyard, we'll pick 2 or 3 different times. So we'll have 2 or 3 different lots of Cabernet in all these different barrels. So there's just kind of this, exploding number of combinations that we can put together for making this blend. And for me, that's great because I have a lot of different flavors to work with, a lot of different tools to put together the best blend.
So Tim, let's go back to the aging question. So how long should you let the Mariner age for?
Yeah, so this one I think has some good life ahead of it. I would, for this one probably go anywhere from 8 to 12 years, maybe longer. Again, it becomes kind of a matter of taste and also the conditions you have for aging your wine. So if you have good temperature control and humidity control, that's great. You can take it out longer. But if not so much, you might want to drink the wine earlier. For me, the problem in trying to age wines is often keeping my hands off the bottles. So my solution has been any wines that I want to age are not at home. I rent a space in a temperature-controlled wine locker that somebody else owns, and I have access to it, but I have to drive there and during certain hours to pull the wine out. And so pretty much if it's in the closet at home, it's going to get drunk within the next year for sure.
Nice. I never knew that. It's good to know about you. Just a general kind of question that popped up was how long what's your rule of thumb for how long you should let your reds aerate after you open them?
Yeah. So to be honest, I don't focus a lot on aeration. Maybe I should. Maybe it's a fault of mine, but I tend to think if you've got a younger red, you might want to, and it's a really big, rich wine. Maybe if it has some harder tannins, you might want to decant it. So if you have a nice, sort of glass or crystal decanter, you kind of pour the wine in there, let it splash, get some oxygen, and then just, maybe you let it sit for, I don't know, an hour or so, and come back to it. That might really help it. But in general, I think if a wine is balanced, you're not going to need a lot of aeration. If you're having it with food, if it's a younger red that's got, bigger tannins, food really helps sort of tame that a lot of times, and it marries really nicely. So yeah, that's kind of my take on aeration. I don't really worry about it a whole lot. And if you've got an older red, especially one that's like, 12 years old, 15 years old, I don't really want to splash or aerate it much at all. I just want to gently pour it in the glass. With older reds, you sometimes get sediment along the side of the bottle. So you have to kind of look carefully and stop pouring when you start getting the sediment. You might even use a flashlight or a candle underneath it to see through the glass. But they won't stand up to a lot of time being open. So, get it in the glass and get it in your mouth.
And then we had a really kind of interesting question for a barrel topic from Ginger and Dan. They mentioned in Bordeaux, they're experimenting with aging wine in ceramic vessels per an ancient technique for sustainability reasons. Have we considered doing this?
Yeah, well, so I know in Bordeaux and here in the United States, some people have gotten into some concrete vessels. And they primarily are using them for fermentation. Typically, there might be some aging as well. I am just personally not sold on those. I've even tasted some white wines made in those, and I really kind of didn't like the flavor that was imparted to the wines. And so something I don't want to ignore. Another great tool, and I don't have anything against people who like using that, and I'm sure they're making successful blends. For me, I haven't been convinced that it's something that I want to use extensively. And I don't know if I can say that it's going to be one of those things that we call a fad, in the winemaking business, or if it's really going to stick and last. But I will say I've been in the business long enough to see a lot of fancy techniques and equipment come and go, and some stand the test of time and others just don't.
Perfect. Well, I think that is most of our questions, except Robert Burke gave me the perfect lead in asking what are our new releases coming up. And so we actually will have Tim back with us next month to do our next virtual tasting on March 18th. That is going to be on our February club releases. So we're going to be talking about Chardonnay and our Beeson Ranch Zinfandel and our Petit Syrah. So I'm really excited about that one. The other new releases we have coming up, Our Zinfandel Lovers Club is coming up in April, which is 4 Zinfandels. And then we, of course, have our Bordeaux Lovers Club coming up in April as well, which includes 2 of our Terroir series wines. If you've been trying to get your hands on those, that's when the Iron Slopes Cabernet and Benchland Meritage will be released. So keep watching out for that. But we'd love to have you join us in March again. The other tasting that we have planned that's coming up in April is actually with Don Wallace, and he's going to be talking about our honey and our olive oil that we are making now under our K&D Mercantile label, which is, of course, Kim and Don, made from olive trees that are planted on the property and honey from the hives that we have on the property as well. So if you haven't signed up for those, definitely do that. The honey and olive oil tasting is going to be a little bit limited by the honey that we have. So if you need to get your hands on that, I recommend signing up for that one early. But thank you everyone so much. I hope I got to all of your questions. It was great to have so many questions tonight. It was absolutely fantastic. And it's so great to see all of your faces. I just love scrolling through this and seeing all of you again. So Tim, I don't know if you have any final words to lead us out with.
It's like Monday morning, you're like, well,
Just wanted to say thank you to everyone. I love doing this.
It's Monday mornings.
A lot of you are old friends that have visited us here often, and we really miss not being in person. So I love spending this time. Thank you very much. Woo.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night, and hopefully we'll
Thank you.
Bye.